And good morning, Bisbee. Welcome to Focus on Bisbee for January 23rd, a rainy day in Bisbee. Isn't that a wonderful winter rain that's out there? Well, it's a totally different place these days. Of course, in Bisbee we've had a new mayor for quite some time, but this week Arizona has a new governor. The nation has a new president. Do you feel any different? Well, it's always a good time in the beginning of a new year for new starts, and that's certainly where we can look forward to. Maybe there'll be some changes in the state. We know there'll be some changes in the state. The budget is, $2 billion in deficit. That'll have to be made up. There'll be changes in the nation, a lot of things being done differently. But for a few minutes, we're going to take a look back in history to start off the show this morning. Margaret will be joining me here in just a couple of minutes. Another thing that we're on the cusp of right now that we'll see how it turns out this year is the tourism season. It usually gets started in earnest about this time of year. Although we were over in Tombstone late yesterday afternoon, it didn't look too touristy. There wasn't an awful lot of people walking up and down the streets. Admittedly, it was a rainy day and a promise of perhaps snow, so that might have kept people away. It looked like the streets were filled with cars, and I was joking with one of the locals about that. He says, "Oh no, that's all the people that work downtown. They get the first parking places." So it looks like a lot of tourist towns suffer from the unwillingness of merchants and their employees to park further out so that the visitors can have a closer place to work. Of course, to some extent, the success of Bisbee's tourist season depends on the success of Tombstone's tourist season, because a lot of people will have heard of Tombstone, get there, and perhaps want to go on and see something more. There's some very nice Bisbee billboards as you come into Tombstone, encouraging people to come on down. Margaret, come on and join us. How are you doing this morning?
Well, the sound works, and the lights are on, and if I scoot in here close to you, like we like
cool.
each other,
Cool. Yeah, we
then
can
I'll
be
be on
actors
camera.
today. Huh? So what's going on out there in the real world?
In the real world, well, we took a trip to the Barrett-Jackson car auction.
Oh,
that was kind of fun.
That was nice. They did 3-4 car auctions up there that week. Their take was down, but they still did something in the order of $140 million in sales. So apparently the high end of the economy isn't as bad off as the low end of the economy. There's still a lot of rich folks that have their jobs.
All those cars we saw sold after sold on just acres and acres of cars.
Yeah, $1 million plus sales. I think there were a couple of $2 million plus sales on Ferraris and things like that from the 60s. So it was fun. Unfortunately, our 15-year-old son sort of got the idea we were taking him car shopping, but that's not where you go car shopping for a kid's first car, no matter how much he would like that. We did get a picture of him next to one of his favorites, a Mustang Cobra.
I think they yelled at him because he drilled on it.
Might have been, but
we have a new addition to the set. Did you notice?
Right here.
Yes.
If you look behind that, there's some beautiful copper, which of course is what it's all about around here. Copper's not doing too well right now, Margaret. We've had just a lot of cutbacks. Copper's down in the neighborhood of $1.50 a pound, coming down from a high of $4 in not too many months. So we've had 1,500 people laid off at Morenci, 1,550. We've had cutbacks in hours in addition to that at Morenci and at Safford. BHP Billiton just last year got its Pinto Valley mine back online, and now it's shutting down in February. Be 400 to 500 people laid off. Layoffs in Silver City, cutbacks all over the place, even cutbacks in the big producers in Chile. BHP Billiton again has delayed projects and laid off about 2,000, mostly contract workers, at Escondida, the world's largest copper mine. And it's just going to keep tumbling like that. There's a lot that I haven't mentioned because the numbers are smaller and not as relevant, but it just keeps just keeps tumbling and tumbling and tumbling. Well, let's go back into history a little bit.
Okay. January 18th, in 1854, the General Jessup River steamer was the first to reach the Black Canyon on the Colorado River.
Wow. Now, do you know where Black Canyon is on the Colorado River? What's there today? Hoover Dam.
Yes. Okay.
So it went a long ways up. That was when, of course, 1854, the Colorado was purely a free-flowing river. And there were times, we're in January, so it really wasn't even the rush of water down there. The rush comes after snow melt up in the Rockies. But it was much gentler, so it was able to make the reach all the way up to modern-day Hoover Dam.
1862, the Confederacy President Jefferson Davis. I can't talk this morning.
Well, that's all right. This will warm you up.
Jefferson Davis signed the Enabling Act, making Arizona Confederate territory.
Arizona became a Confederate territory in the year before it became a Union territory. And basically, both the Union and the Confederacy were after one thing, silver. Although there were other things that made Arizona, this area, interesting to them. But really what they wanted was the precious metals.
1927, the Tucson Daily Star announced that Senor Juan...
No, Senor.
Senor.
Yeah, they just left the tilde off there.
Juan Everesto Anchondo had developed a self-lighting cigarette which was ignited by briskly rubbing the tip over a striking surface on the package. Sounds like a great idea, but apparently it didn't stay.
No, I don't think so. I suppose that probably some of them lit in the package, or a lot of them didn't light.
In your pocket.
Yeah, so you might have had some problems. It's an idea whose time has not yet come. Now you'd probably make more publicity out of lighting a self-extinguishing cigarette.
Yes. 1952, the Great Seal of the Navajo Tribe was adopted by the Tribal Council. The winning entry was submitted by John Claw, Jr.
Okay.
Who was John Claw, Jr.?
Well, he was an artist who was... Keep going.
January 19th, 1895, the Nogales Oasis newspaper noted that in Phoenix there are now several restaurants offering a square meal for the sum of 15 cents.
Well, that's not bad, but then again, that was 114 years ago, and in that time, we think that prices have gone up, and they certainly have, but if that were converted from cents to hours worked, it would probably be less for a square meal today than it was then.
Wow.
Because 15 cents was a good chunk of a day's pay.
Yes.
Now a square meal is a good chunk of an hour's pay.
Right. 1921, the Phoenix police chief issued an order that all pedestrians on the streets after 8 p.m. were to be stopped and searched for concealed weapons in an effort to combat crime.
Well, it sounds like Tombstone 40 years earlier. Tombstone, of course, had a law, even at the time of the OK Corral, that guns had to be left with someone. They could be left at the police station or in the corral, or when you walked into the bar, you could turn them over, because they didn't want people getting into poker games, getting drunk, and having a weapon on them. And, of course, that is what led to a lot of controversy over the OK Corral gunfight.
Well, when you think about crime, they don't stop people in Phoenix and search them now for concealed weapons.
And maybe that's why the crime rate is so high.
Maybe they should.
All right.
1926, Margaret Rowe Clifton, author of Arizona's state song, died.
Okay. We had to learn that song back when I was in 3rd grade, I think.
Still know it?
Sing the song that's in your heart. Sing of the great Southwest. Thank God for Arizona in splendid sunshine dress, for thy beauty and thy grandeur. And that's about where I lose out. I can't remember the rest of it. But it's sort of a what would you call it? I don't know the word for it, but it's one that nobody wants to sing today. So, what is the unofficial state song?
The unofficial, I know this one.
Well, let me give you, the guy that sang it has a close tie to Wilcox.
Wilcox.
Yeah. It's Rex Allen Jr.
Uh-huh.
And I won't even try to sing that. I will give you people a break out there. But his Arizona, which mentions...
I love you, Arizona. That one.
That one, yeah.
Yeah.
Mentions
That's all I'm saying.
two geographic locations. I think it mentions the superstitions, but in Cochise County it talks about Dos Cabezas, I believe.
Uh-huh.
Those are the only two geographic locations mentioned in that. And that's a much more popular song, or at least it was in the 70s, 80s, 90s when it was a popular song. What else we got here?
January 20th, 1862, the Colorado River started rising. 2 days later, it rose 3 feet in 3 hours, reaching its peak on January 23rd. Fort Yuma became an island, and Colorado City, now Yuma, was washed away.
You know, that happens every once in a while. That was back in 1862, but Arizona had very heavy rainfall, doing some damage there again in the 1890s. But here, what about 15 years ago, the Yuma area got 4 inches of rain in one afternoon, and it almost washed the town away then. It's amazing. You get a place that usually has 4 inches of rain in 2 years,
right,
and you pour it all down in an afternoon, and it's impressive.
1889, Burton C. Mossman, who was to become the first captain of the Arizona Rangers, arrived in Holbrook to become manager of the Aztec Land and Cattle Company, better known as Hash Knife Ranch.
Or the Hash Knife Outfit. Bert Mossman was a very politically astute guy. He ended up spending a lot of time, even when he was up at Hash Knife, he ended up spending a lot of time in Phoenix playing cards with the heavy-duty politicians.
Okay.
And he was able to make himself known to the territorial governor as a man who brooked no criminal element. And so the Hash Knife, the story of the Hash Knife, is a tremendous story of frontier crime and frontier law enforcement. And he was very successful at cleaning up the Hash Knife for its absentee landlords who lived back east and maybe in England. And so the governor offered him the job in the Arizona Rangers, and he really said that he wanted it for 1 year, no more, and he stuck to that. He's one of those people that promised not to run again, and he didn't, although it was an appointed job. His techniques were effective, although somewhat unorthodox. He actually he was looking for a guy who had committed a murder up in Solomon, the Safford area, and the guy ended up fleeing to Mexico. And Mossman did a disguise. He enlisted the aid of a couple of guys who were part-time law enforcement in Cochise County and part-time criminals in Cochise County. And they lured the guy into the camp, and Mossman brought him back to the U.S., and he would hang by the neck until dead up in Solomonville. And he was very successful. After he left the Arizona Rangers, he stayed in Bisbee. He opened a butcher shop, which he then later sold to the Overlocks, and he went on to did other things.
Okay.
But he was a very colorful beginning for the Arizona Rangers. And, of course, they would later, in their about 9 years of existence, have 2 more captains, both of whom were also very colorful characters. Keep going.
Guess you would have to be.
You would. It was a time that that called for men of action and gave them freedom to act. Today there are so many laws, so many expectations, so much right to know and all that no one has the ability to act. No one can do much of anything.
Yeah. 1912, 44 delegates representing every labor organization met in Phoenix and formed the Arizona State Federation of Labor.
They published their own newspaper, and if you are looking for an alternative to the company-owned newspaper view of the deportation, it's their labor newspaper that will certainly give it to you. And if you think that the local newspapers in reporting on the deportation were salacious, you should see what the labor journals do. I mean, one is as far right as you can imagine, and one is as far left as you can imagine. So you add them together, discount everything that you think you should, and you might get somewhere close to what might resemble the truth someday.
Understand Thomas has sort of badgered you into writing about the deportation again.
Yes, I got a blog going, and it's just started, so I'll let you folks know when it's more complete, so you can go there and read about it. I have a book that is 75% finished, and hopefully it'll be out in time for the deportation anniversary this summer.
Okay.
And more to come.
Sounds good.
Well, I hope so. It's certainly Bisbee's most interesting historical subject.
1912, work began on the El Paso and Southwestern Railroad terminal in Tucson.
This part of the country is different in that as you drive between Benson and Tucson, there are two separate railroad tracks. Okay. Originally, one was the Southern Pacific, got to Tucson in 1880, and the other was the Arizona and Southeastern, or later the El Paso and Southwestern. It was the Phelps-Dodge line. Phelps-Dodge could not come to an agreement with Southern Pacific, and so it built its own rail line, first from Bisbee to El Paso to connect with points east and north, and then up to Tucson. Actually, they selected land in Los Angeles and bought it to build a terminal there and to take the El Paso and Southwestern from Tucson all the way to Los Angeles, but it never came about. Eventually, Southern Pacific and El Paso and Southwestern came to an agreement, and Southern Pacific bought the line in 1923.
Okay. And
so there's only one railroad into the area. But originally the railroads were very protective of their territory. So we had the Santa Fe coming to Benson, coming down to Fairbank, and then shooting across into Nogales and down to Mexico. And that is where material from Bisbee originally had to go to prior to 1889. It went up to Fairbank and then points north. It had to be hauled by wagon up to Fairbank.
January 21st, 1877, Allen's Camp, Arizona changed its name to St. Joseph after the prophet Joseph Smith.
Okay, well that's how many Mormon settlements named Saint are there in Arizona now? We have one close at hand.
Yes.
St. David.
Yes.
And then there's another one up north. What is it? I can't remember the name of it right now. St. John's.
Okay.
And then St. Joseph. Okay, there's a few of those. The urban myth is that any Mormon settlement with a saint in it practiced polygamy.
Okay.
But there's never been any evidence of that. That's just what non-Mormons say.
Okay, 1921, the first serious accident in the history of Bright Angel Trail at the Grand Canyon occurred. 3 pack horses loaded with hay, grain, provisions, bedding, and 116 pounds of dynamite fell over the wall of the canyon and were killed.
Wow.
On the rocks below. The supplies were for a construction camp at the foot of the trail where the National Park Service was building a bridge across the Colorado River.
Wow. Well, another serious accident occurred on Bright Angel Trail in the summer of 1970. A bunch of us kids from
us
kids. Yeah, I was between my junior and senior year in high school. You can do the math now. And I was at a National Science Foundation Summer Institute at NAU, and we went up to the Grand Canyon that weekend. And just as we were starting down the trail, we were going to hike as far as we could and then turn around and come back for the day. We got to a point where somebody, a young man, older than us, had been using some sort of hallucinogenic drug, which of course was coming into prominence at that time thanks to people like Timothy Leary, and had decided that that trail would be a perfect place for him to begin soaring down into the canyon. So he leaped over the edge. And so some of us boys went down the steep side of the trail. We made a makeshift cart out of our belts, and we hauled him back up. He was alive at that time, but I never found out what happened to him.
Wow.
Yeah, so serious accidents do happen, some self-inflicted.
Yes. On this date in 1934, Jesse W. Ellison, who established the Q Ranch in Gila County, died.
I wonder what his brand was.
Gosh, maybe Q?
Hey, that would be good. Maybe that would be good. And then his grandson went on to make highly technical stuff for James Bond. We got time for, what, one or two more?
You see any good ones? Let's see.
Well, let's see what's... Oh, I don't know. Pick one. We don't have much time. Here, do this one.
January 24th, 1887, the first donation to build the Mormon temple in Mesa was received from Mrs. Helen Roseberry, a poor widow of Pima.
Now Mesa is getting a Mormon tabernacle, I suppose. I don't know what the exact term, but it's going to be a huge building, and it's there was a piece in the Arizona Republic here a few weeks ago comparing Mesa to Salt Lake City and showing how property values rose near a Mormon establishment, how it actually brought up property values. Just an interesting economic take on building a facility like that. How about this one? This is an interesting one.
I was going to say the next one's interesting. Yeah. We can't leave without doing that.
No.
1917, a revolt broke out in the Arizona National Guard encampment at Naco, with Company M parading up and down the company street, announcing that they wanted to go home.
Well, yeah. 1917, of course, the U.S. Army had sort of been shipped over to Europe. The border rebellion was still going on. We were only a year or so. We're in January. So really the U.S. hadn't entered the war, but there was still a lot of National Guards on the border. We were a year or so from Pancho Villa coming across the border at Columbus. A lot of concern about guarding the border. And National Guard units, similar to what's happening today, were being extended. Their time was being extended. And there was sort of a mutiny there. It shows up in the Bisbee Daily Review in the newspaper at that time on one day, and then it disappears. Apparently, the powers that be got to him and said, we don't want this kind of publicity, so let's just forget about it. But apparently, there was a minor rebellion or riot or whatever you want to call it in the Arizona National Guard encampment at Naco, and I suppose they got it under control.